Hello again. Tonight, we're going somewhere darker, but softly, carefully, but of whispers, but of fear woven into the fabric of everyday life. This is the story of the 17th century, which hunts a chapter in history where religion and anxiety held hands, and where the line between belief and danger was impossibly thin. You won't need to stay awake for all of it. Let the details wash over you like dusk falling over an old village lane. Let the quiet repetition of this history ease your thoughts into sleep. We won't linger on flames or cruelty. Instead, we'll listen to the footsteps of ordinary people living in uncertain times and wondering if the world around them had turned just a little strange. Let your mind wander now, to fields edged by forest, to a cottage, to a sky that churns with clouds, silently, before the accusations, before the trials, before the silence turned to fear. The year is 1612, or 1658, or 1673. It hardly matters. The rhythm was much the same. You're not in a castle or a city. You're in a small village, maybe in England, or Scotland, or parts of New England in the colonies. A place where everyone knows your name, and everyone remembers what your grandmother once said by the fire. Houses are wooden or thatched, clustered around a church, a square, a muddy road. The air smells of wood smoke. The calendar is marked not by the turning of pages, but by the pulse of the seasons: planting, harvest, Candlemas, Michaelmas, All Saints' Day. The village moves with nature's clock. And yet, behind the rhythm of this ordinary life, a belief in things unseen, but the sense that not all misfortune is accidental. A sick cow, a spoiled loaf, a storm that bends the trees too far. These are things that happen, but in this world, they often happen because of someone. The world is not ruled by chance. It is ruled by intentions good or ill. And so, beneath the quiet of daily life, there hums a background of stories, of sayings, of cautious glances. You borrow a needle from your neighbor, and when her child coughs, there's no courtroom, no drama, just a slow turning, a soft murmur, a whisper behind the closed shutters. Life carries on, because in this world, being noticed can be dangerous, and being strange, even more so. The hearth crackles gently. Outside, the clouds are low, their edges heavy with the promise of rain. It's a quiet village, no more than 24 homes tucked along a narrow lane, ringed by hedges and scattered trees. A place where routines are known, where names are remembered, and where faces are seen almost every day. It is outwardly, but not all peace is free of unease. In this village, life is shaped not only by seasons or harvests, not the formal belief of sermons and scripture alone, whispers passed down by mothers and midwives, beliefs that speak of signs and omens and small misfortunes that may not be entirely natural. The woman at the edge of the village is not feared exactly, lives alone. Her house leans slightly. Her cat sleek and grey follows her without leash or command, slipping behind her through the door or curling beside her in the garden. It isn't strange. People keep animals, but hers seems to listen, to watch, to know. Children giggle nervously when they pass by. She's helpful, sometimes. Years ago, she brewed a bitter tea that stopped a woman's cough. She is known to carry dried leaves and crushed bark in small pouches tied to her apron strings. She doesn't speak much, and when she looks at someone for too long, they sometimes wonder what she sees. A few weeks ago, she argued with the baker. He was short with her. She said something under her breath as she walked away. No one heard exactly what, and now, only days later, his oven has cracked. The fire doesn't catch. His bread rises oddly, or not at all. His wife mutters about bad luck, but others remember. They say little, but their thoughts begin to arrange themselves, without meaning to, into something that looks like a story. Another woman walks each morning into the forest. She says she gathers herbs, that she knows which mushrooms are safe and which are not. She returns with dirt under her nails and the scent of pine in her sleeves. Once, a child saw her kneeling in a clearing, not in Latin, quietly, alone. She smiles when she speaks, but her smile is brief, like a door left half open. A storm comes. It wasn't expected. The sky had been pale and dry that morning, but by dusk, wind howls along the rooftops and the air grows thick. Lightning strikes a tree in the square. A cow is found dead in the field, its flank torn by the fallen branch. The villagers gather the next morning. About the oddness, someone recalls that the woman who walks in the woods. They do not accuse her, but they do not greet her. A man dreams. In his dream, a figure stands at the edge of his bed. Still, watching, he wakes. Heart pounding, throat dry. He says nothing to his wife. But 2 days later, when his child develops a fever that doesn't break, he doesn't say her name. But the image is clear. It was the widow. He's certain. The cat was there, too. No one acts on this dream, but it lives in his eyes. And when he passes her on the road the next morning, he does not speak. He does not even nod. And she notices. And others notice that she notices. Across the village, other stories begin to weave themselves together. A goat that gave sour milk, a dog that howled all night, then was found dead, a butter churn that wouldn't take. None of these are unusual, but when misfortune comes often, toward patterns, no single thing is enough. But slowly, surely, unease begins to settle. Like ash, it gathers quietly until one day it becomes. This is not a world of courtroom drama, not yet. No judges or gallows, just moments when the laughter stops as someone passes, and for the one being watched, a fog that thickens without warning. In a place where survival depends on trust, on fitting in, even the smallest divergence can feel like danger. The line between normal and unnatural is thin, and thinner still for those who live alone. In such a world, it creeps, it grows. It is born not from monsters and from fear, and so the ordinary, and in time, fear finds a voice, but not yet. For now, the stew simmers, the cat, and outside, the village prepares for sleep. The days grow shorter now. The mornings are slow to rise, and the evenings fold in early, grey and cool and still. Smoke curls from low chimneys across the village. At a glance, Life seems unchanged. The bread is baked, the firewood stacked, the children play in the dirt, and the church bell marks the hour with its dull, familiar tone. But something is different. It is not a loud difference. Nor you, a hush that falls when a name is spoken, a hesitation in greeting, a shared glance when a certain woman walks past. Not hatred, not violence, not yet, only distance. And it is from this space, it is not content to remain quiet. It must grow. It must find confirmation. The widow still walks the village paths, but her nods are not returned. As often as before, the cat, once the object of harmless laughter, now draws quick glances. A boy mutters that it stared at him too long. A girl refuses to walk past the cottage alone. The vicar receives visitors now, who lower their voices, who express concern, who say they are not certain. They feel something is amiss. One woman says her child had a fever, and the tea, brewed by the widow, made it worse. Another says she saw the old woman turning her head 3 times. A man recalls a dream vague, still troubling, and these small things each, not yet. But the seeds are planted, and the air around the village grows thicker. The wind howls against the shutters, the fields flood at their edges, and in the morning a cow is found dead, another ill, a boy's ankle is twisted heed, nothing unnatural. But these days, nature itself is not enough explanation. Someone says, aloud now, that the village is cursed, that something is wrong here. Someone has opened a door that should have stayed closed. And once it is spoken once, the idea is no longer only a whisper, it becomes real. The village gathers more often now. At the well, outside the church, not for festivals or feast days, but to talk. They begin to sort through events with new eyes, looking backward, reframing the death of the miller's wife, last spring, the spoiled flower, the early frost. Each moment is a puzzle piece, and when arranged in just the right way, a picture begins to emerge. It is never certain. That's the trick. No moment that proves guilt. Only coincidences stitched together by fear. One woman older, kind-faced, she says. She remembers the widow's mother, that she was odd, too, that she kept bees and never married again, that perhaps these things run in blood. A man says that the cat disappeared for 3 days, then returned clean and fat. Another says he found odd marks on his barn door. Another still insists he heard chanting in the early hours, though he can't say where from. And so the pattern sharpens. The fog becomes a shape, and the shape has a name. She is not warned, not confronted. She only notices, slowly, that she is more alone, that no one asks for herbs anymore, that children run when she approaches, that when she enters the square, and then, one day, she is named. Not in court, not yet, but in conversation, a voice says, it might be her, and once said. It cannot be unsaid. Others begin to speak more freely. The woman who lost her baby the year before says she had always wondered The man with the sick goat says he now sees it clearly. The woman with the dream says she feared it was real. And the village, which once watched silently, now watches closely. They observe her movements. They count her steps. They note the herbs she picks and where she walks. They claim her. Cat's meow sounds unnatural. That the chimney smoke from her cottage smells strange. Fear makes the familiar seem foreign, and in this world, the foreign is dangerous. She is still the same woman, still lights her fire and eats her bread. But now, everything she does is viewed through a different lens. When she helps someone, when she avoids them, when she smiles, it is cunning. No action is safe. Once suspicion takes root, a fever, a cry in the night. The mother wails. The father sits pale and rigid, and someone, in the stillness between coughs, says the words. She looked at him just yesterday. The next morning, they go to the vicar. It is to accuse. She is named, out loud, and once more, the world tilts, ever so slightly, but enough. She is called to answer, not from guilt, but it does not matter. A shaking voice sounds like deception. A calm one would have sounded like pride. There is no right answer, no safe path back to innocence. In this moment, all that matters is how people feel. And they feel afraid. And so it begins. The sun is low now. Shadows stretch longer across the fields. The thatched roofs glow amber with evening light. And inside the small village church, where the air still smells faintly of damp wood and tallow smoke, the air feels heavier than usual. The pews are mostly full, not for worship, not for celebration, but for something else. The woman accused sits near the front, alone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. There is no shackles, and it's quiet. Growing certainty, measured, not cruel. He does not rage, but he speaks of righteousness, of vigilance, of the danger of unseen wickedness among good Christian souls. He speaks not of her, not directly, but his words curl in the air like incense. This is not a trial in the way you might imagine, not a court of law with rules and representation, and far more intimate, because here the accusers are neighbors, people who once shared bread, who once asked for help, or offered a greeting in the lane, and now they step forward, one by one. They speak not of crimes, but of moments, of looks, of dreams, of milk that soured, of a shadow that seemed, just for a moment, not quite right. A woman says that she saw the cat on her windowsill at dawn, staring in. She says she felt watched, and soon after, her husband fell from the ladder and broke his arm. Another says she heard a chant barely, a whisper on the wind. She does not know what it meant. They do not shout with discomfort, as if they too are victims of the knowledge they now share. This is not about hatred, the kind of fear that seeks an explanation. And in this village, she says she never meant harm. She says she has lived here for many years. She says she has nothing to confess. But even her words become suspicious. Those who fear her hear defiant. Those who once trusted her now wonder why she does not beg. In a world where misfortune must have a cause, a refusal to admit guilt can feel like proof of deeper, darker denial. And so the questions continue, about the dreams, about the storm, about the way the child cried after she passed by. She tries to answer, but the answers are never enough, because the question is not really, what did you do? It is, why do we feel this way about you? And she cannot answer that. No one can, outside the church. The air smells of turned earth and cooling hearths. Children are kept inside. Doors are bolted a little earlier inside. The final decision, the village, in its quiet way, has already chosen. She will be watched, or worse. But for now, the fear has a shape, and in naming her, the village feels safer. Not truly safe, but safer. She is allowed to return to her cottage for now. But she is no longer left alone. One woman follows from across the square, not openly, not rudely, just enough to make her feel it. The cat disappears again. Some say it was taken, others say it fled. She sits by her hearth. The herbs hang untouched. She is not crying. She simply stares into the flame, as if looking for something beyond it, and outside, that it has protected itself, that God will see their care, and the storms will ease, and the milk will thicken, and the coughs will fade. But peace, bought with fear, is always fragile. The next frost will come, the next fever, the next quarrel, and when it does, the villagers will remember how they felt now, how naming a fear seemed to banish it, and they will wonder who else might be watched. This is how it begins, not with fire, but with stillness, with soft voices, with cold glances in candlelight. And by the time the flames come, if they come, the fire is not the start. It is only the end of something that began much earlier, in a cottage, in a dream, in a feeling no one could explain, but everyone began to believe. The making of a witch, from life to accusation. Her name, at least here, is Alice. It's a soft name, common in its time, easy on the tongue. You might imagine her now, sitting near the doorway of her modest home, the door left slightly open to let in the last light of a spring afternoon. The house is small, one room. The walls are wattle and daub, patched in places. The roof smells faintly of damp straw and smoke, always smoke. She is in her early 50s, though she feels older. Her hands are strong, calloused at the joint. She works every day drawing water, tending the garden behind her cottage, mending her own clothes. There is no one else to do it. Her husband died 7 winters ago. A fever, sudden and hard. He worked with woodcart wheels. After he was gone, one of the wealthier families sent firewood. But as the years passed, and Alice learned once again how to depend only on herself, she was not always alone. Once, long ago, there had been a daughter. She did not survive childhood. A cough, then a fever, then a quiet slipping away in the middle of the night. Alice buried her beneath the apple tree in the garden, though not too deeply. The ground was hard that year, and her shovel cracked on frost. The tree still blossoms each spring. Even now, Alice is not bitter. She tends her herbs lavender. She keeps a small patch of leeks. She sometimes walks to the stream to gather water. She knows when to plant by the moon, when to look for nettles, when the birds begin to change their calls before rain. None of this is strange to her. The way life has always been. She has knowledge practical, not studied. She knows which leaves to crush for a headache, how to treat a scratch, so it doesn't fester. The village has come to her, and she's helped. If the tea she brews doesn't cure the ache, or perhaps, deep down, she didn't truly wish for healing, and if it does, help if the pain fades, or the swelling goes down, then perhaps she knows something more, something she shouldn't. That's the danger of women like Alice. She knows enough to be useful, and that is precisely what makes her dangerous when fear finds a foothold. She doesn't attend every service at church. Her knees hurt. She prays at home, softly, hands folded near the hearth. She means no harm, but absence is noted. And when the harvest fails, or the vicar's cow calves early, and the offspring doesn't live, someone recalls that Alice was seen walking before dawn that week. Someone else says she turned her head strangely when the vicar passed. A few of the children are afraid of her. They say her eyes are too blue, or that her smile is crooked. They invent games, which in the hedge, one day, a girl dares her friend to knock on Alice's door at sunset. The child does. Alice opens it with surprise and offers the girl a piece of dried apple. The girl takes it, then drops it. They all look at the fruit. No one touches it again. She begins to stay inside more often. At the market, people speak around her. She picks up her turnips quickly. The stall holder does not meet her eye. She begins to feel the shift, not all at once, but gently, like the slow turn of season, like a summer turning toward autumn. A dog barks at her in the street. Its owner pulls it back and mutters, "Be still now." But not to the dog. She tries not to worry. She sweeps her doorstep. She tends the little grave beneath the apple tree. She speaks aloud less often now, and in the quiet, the village continues to shift around her. A child falls ill. A boy, maybe 5 years old, a bright, laughing child who ran too often barefoot through cold puddles. His mother is young, and when she cannot break his fever, she remembers something, Alice once said. But the words echo now. They were too precise, too casual. The boy dies. Then, days later, she speaks to the midwife, and from that moment, the story begins to form. Alice is not accused, not yet, but her name is spoken in a different tone. One that drops a little lower at the end, one that trails off, inviting others to add to it. And they do. The woman with the spoiled bread says she saw Alice walk past her cottage that morning. The man whose dog limped says the animal barked only after Alice looked toward it. Another woman says Alice once brushed her sleeve too slowly in the market. The story is almost complete. Not loud, just assembled piece by piece until it becomes too real to ignore. Alice is not prepared because she has done nothing, but knowledge is not protection here, and innocence is not armor. And so the making of a witch begins, not in one moment, but in many small ones, woven together with threads spun from fear and grief, uncertainty looking for a name. And once her name is spoken aloud once, someone says, "We should watch her." Then there is no turning back. The sky is grey again, not heavy with storm just. It is neither winter nor spring. The ground is too wet. The village feels suspended, as if it waits for something to pass. Alice sweeps her doorway that morning. The bristles of her broom drag gently. Her cat, no longer a kitten, but not yet old, sits nearby, grooming itself with practiced indifference. The same routine, the same quiet, the same small, self-contained world, but outside her garden wall, they come together, not weeping, not angry, just uneasy. They speak softly. They do not demand. They simply say that something feels wrong, that the boy's death, the spoiled milk, the strange rash on the baby's arm, all of it seems connected, and the name that ties them all together is spoken almost reluctantly. Alice? They don't accuse her, not yet. They merely suggest that someone should speak with her, that, perhaps, the village would be safer if she were watched a little more closely. This is how it begins, gently, respectably. There is no outrage. That is the word they use, concern. He is not cruel, not loud. He wears his hat. He does not enter without permission. He tells her, with practiced calm, that a few villagers have come forward, that they've noticed unusual things, that there have been illnesses, accidents, strange behavior. He asks her if she knows anything about it. Alice is confused. Then, as he explains, frightened, not visibly but inwardly, her mouth goes dry. She shakes her head, that she is not to blame. The constable listens. Then he says, very gently, that she should not leave the village for a few days, just until the matter is settled, that it's best if she stays nearby for appearances, that she is not being accused, just questioned. But Alice understands, even if the word which has not yet been said, it is there, hovering in the silence, behind every phrase, in the glances, in the narrowing of space around her. She is now the subject of inquiry. Her walks to the stream are noted. The chimney smoke from her cottage is observed. Her cat disappears again, perhaps frightened off, perhaps taken. Inside her home, she lights a fire and sits by it long into the night. She does not sleep, not deeply. Each sound outside makes her stiffen. The wind sounds like footsteps, the branches like whispers. She is not guilty of anything but being alone, being strange, being known, remembered, and feared at the same time. The next day, she is summoned again, this time to the chapel, to answer more formal questions. There is no real court here. The law is distant, but the village has its own way of arranging judgment. The vicar, the constable, they sit across from her at a long wooden table. A candle burns. A Bible rests in front of them, unopened. They ask her about the fevered child, about the herbs she gave to the midwife, about the storm that came unexpectedly last month. She answers as best she can. She says she used only what she knew, that she never claimed her teas were cures, that storms come and go, as they always have, but her calmness is unsettling to them. They were expecting fear or denial. or even tears. Instead, she is tired, measured, looks too much like pride. They ask her. She says, "The air is quiet, and the birds haven't yet scattered." They ask her why she speaks to herself when she gardens. She says it helps her remember the names of the plants. They ask her why she lives alone, and to that she says nothing, and painful, and known already. The silence hangs heavy in the room. They say, again, this is not an accusation, just a precaution. But the room says otherwise. The eyes that won't quite meet hers, the candle that flickers and spits in the stillness. She is told to remain at home, that she is not to receive visitors, that her cottage may be examined just. They want to look for marks, for books, for small bundles of sticks wrapped with twine. They want to find something they cannot name. She gathers her herbs into baskets and stores them out of sight. She wraps the small doll her daughter once held in a bit of cloth and buries it in the garden, not because she is guilty, but because she knows now that even innocence can be used against her. That kindness, if misunderstood, becomes a curse. That memory, in the hands of fear, becomes a weapon. The constable comes the next morning with 2 men. They search the home slowly. They open cabinets, lift pots, unfold linens. They poke beneath the bed and into the hearth ashes. But still they leave with furrowed brows, because nothing in itself feels suspicious. Shouldn't there be something? They expected answers, but the absence of proof becomes a kind of proof itself. In the village, people begin to speak more freely, not just of Alice. Children mimic her walk. A woman claims she saw a crow circle her roof 3 times. A man says his foot went numb when she passed by only for a moment, but enough. And so it gathers like smoke beneath a closed roof. Alice stops walking to the stream. She draws water from the village well again. She leaves her shutters drawn, even when the light fades early. But none of it helps, because it is no longer about what she does. It is about what others see in her. She has been cast into a role she never asked for, one written long before she was born, of the wise woman, the one who keeps to herself. And in a time of trouble, that role is easy to revive. She becomes, quietly, a witch. Not in deed, not in truth. And once that name is fixed to her, the season turns again. Leaves dry and fall in lazy spirals along the paths that crisscross the village. The air, once damp, with early autumn, and the mornings bring thin veils of frost that glimmer faintly before the sun warms them away. A neighbor boy brings her a bundle once a week. He does not linger. In the cottage, the fire is kept low. A crust of bread soft with water, a turnip boiled without herbs. She has stopped preparing her mixtures. The village, meanwhile, prepares itself, quietly, deliberately. The vicar travels to a nearby parish to speak with a man who once oversaw a trial like this. He brings back notes, a copy of a printed pamphlet cracked and curling at the corners that describes signs to look for, ways to test, questions to ask. The constable studies it in the evenings by candlelight. A formal inquiry. Alice will be brought before the town elders and asked to answer once more. But this time, it is not merely conversation, it is declaration. The threshold between fear and judgment is being crossed now. The place chosen is not a courtroom. There are no stone halls, no galleries for spectators. It is the chapel again. Wooden pews, iron sconces. But the mood has shifted. It is quieter now, even than on the Sabbath, and more tense. Alice. Her dress is clean but faded. She does not protest. She knows, now, that these things would not help her. She stands before the eldersmen she has known for years. Men who once nodded to her in the square, who once asked after her husband's illness, or smiled at her daughter by the well. Now their expressions are polite, controlled, touched with unease. The vicar begins. His voice is measured, his tone even. He reminds those gathered that this is not a punishment, that the Lord expects vigilance, that strange events must not be left unanswered, that the devil, if he walks among men, may do so in the garments of the innocent. He does not name her as guilty, but the implication hangs in the air. The questioning begins. They ask where she was on certain days when the fever struck, when the storm came, when the bread spoiled in the baker's house. She answers softly, her voice a little hoarse. She had been in her home, or gathering water, or mending clothes. They ask what she knows of herbs, where she learned her craft. She says her mother taught her that it is not magic, that it is just knowledge like any other. They ask if she has spoken curses aloud. She says no. They ask if she has ever felt anger toward her neighbors, then answers truthfully. Sometimes this flicker of honesty's met with silence, because truth, even when harmless, can sound dangerous in this room. One man stands to testify. He says she once gave him a salve for an aching knee, and that it worked, but later the pain returned, sharper than before. He now wonders if it was not a cure at all, but a trap. Another woman says she dreamed of Alice standing at her door, eyes burning like coals. She woke to find her daughter's cradle turned over. Another says she heard voices outside her home at night. She looked and saw no one, but she is certain Alice was nearby. They are not lies, they are memories. Coincidences. Alice listens. She knows, somehow, that each answer she gives is already expected, that her innocence is not being tested, only her role, and that role has already been chosen, not cruelly, just by the midwife and another elder's wife. They are to look for signs marks. The devil might have left a mole, because done in the back room of the chapel. The midwife is kind but distant. She finds a small spot behind Alice's knee, a place where an old burn left a faint scar. She cannot say what it means, but she reports it anyway. This becomes the whisper that travels furthest. They do not know what it means, but they know what to call it. From this moment forward, the question is no longer whether she is a witch. It is what must be done about her. The inquiry ends with prayer. The vicar's voice rises in Latin. But Alice does not. She looks up at the wooden beams overhead, and she thinks not of curses, not of anger, but of silence, and how it has become louder than words. She is allowed to return to her home again. But this time, there are guards at her gate. But everyone knows why they're there. The sky is low and white. A quiet, bleached light covers the village like linen, left in the sun too long. It is cold without being bitter, and there is no wind to soft breath of winter in waiting. Inside her small home, Alice sits near the hearth. The coals are red but tired. She hasn't been to the market in days, not since the inquiry. A boy brings her a heel of bread each morning, sets it down beside the door, and leaves before she opens it. It is always wrapped in a square of rough cloth. She does not know if the cloth is meant to protect the bread or the boy. The guards still linger near her gate. They don't speak to her. They speak to each other in low voices and take turns leaning against the wall. Their presence is meant to be procedural. That is the word the vicar used. But Alice knows better. They are there to remind the village and her of what she has become. She hasn't spoken aloud in nearly 2 days. When she finally does, it is to herself. A name? Her daughter's name? The fire snaps quietly in response. There is no jury, no judge, no advocate to speak for Alice. There is only consensus. In this time, in this place, justice is not blind. It watches closely. The vicar presents the testimonies, the notes from those who spoke, the timeline of events, the deaths, the illnesses, the strange weather, the sightings, the connections drawn some tenuous. They speak of mercy, of keeping the devil at bay. And then, in quiet agreement, she is not to be executed. That much they are sure of. There has been no confession, but there has been enough to act. She will be exiled, moved beyond the forest. She will not be permitted to return. Her cottage will be taken down, her garden burned, the earth salted. This is not cruelty. They say it is caution. They want to believe they are sparing her. They do not see what they are truly taking. The constable comes to her door just after dawn the next day. He brings a cart. He simply says, "It is time to go." She does not argue. She wraps her shawl, ties the cord on her dress, picks up a small satchel containing the last of her belongings, a wooden spoon. The cat does not appear. She looks once behind the hearth, once beneath the stool. Then she opens the door and steps outside, blinking in the pale light. The road is empty except for the cart and the men. The village has stayed away. The ride is slow. The ruts in the road bounce the cart. The sky stays white and silent. When they reach the border of the hamlet, the constable sets her bundle on the step. He says, "A few supplies have been left inside." He nods. Then he leaves. She is alone again. No one in the new village comes to greet her. No one offers a loaf or even a glance. A few doors close. As she walks past, a child, peering from behind a fence, is pulled quickly inside. She understands. This is how it begins. Her name, her presence, her story, they have all come before her. And even if this place is untouched by storm or sickness, the shadow of her reputation has arrived early. She tends the hearth. The herbs she gathers are kept out of sight. The prayers she speaks are whispered, without sound. In time, Perhaps the village will forget. Perhaps her name will fade. Not entirely. She has become the echo of a fear, a symbol, a warning, and symbols are not. Back in her old village, the garden is pulled up, the soil turned over, the apple tree is cut down, its wood burned. Children are told not to speak of her. Adults do not mention her name. But the silence, when another illness comes, or a drought, or a child goes missing in the woods for a few hours, they will remember, they will wonder, and someone new will be watched more closely. This is the true shape of the hunt. It is not only about fire or rope or drowning, it is about what fear becomes when it is left to settle. When the mind cannot explain what it sees, and so it looks for a face. Alice's face is gone now. But the space she occupied remains, and in time, that space will ask to be filled again. Religion, magic, and misunderstanding. Imagine a world where invisible forces shape every corner of life, where spirits are not abstract ideas, where illness isn't only a matter of the body, where a storm, a failure of crops, or a sudden death are not simply events, but messages, punishments, or omens. Now imagine that this world is not only believed in by some, but by everyone. This is the world of the 17th century, a world where magic and religion do not stand apart, but often intertwine, where the line between holy and heretical is delicate and shifting, and where ordinary people live every day, guided by rituals, signs, and deeply rooted beliefs about what lies just beyond the edge of sight. It's important to remember, those who feared witches, and those who accused them, were not acting from superstition in the way we might think of it today. They were acting from certainty that the world was full of powers, some divine, some dark. To live in the 17th century was to live beneath the heavy presence of the church, not simply on Sundays. Meals began with grace. Marriage was sacrament. The world was not neutral. It was a spiritual battlefield, and human souls were caught in the middle. The devil was not metaphor. He was a real, roaming presence, always near, always seeking. People believed not symbolically, but literally, that the devil could walk among them, that he could tempt, that he could choose someone, especially a vulnerable soul, and offer them favors in exchange for loyalty. And in this landscape of divine and demonic presence, the idea of the witch emerged, not just as a person who cast spells, but as someone who had entered into a pact, someone who had traded her soul, someone who now acted as a servant of darkness. But magic itself wasn't always evil. Folk knowledge using. People believed in cunning men and wise women who could help with healing, love, childbirth, lost items. They were respected, even needed. But it was a fragile kind of respect, because the same herbs that eased a fever might also cause a miscarriage. The same chant used to bring good luck to a field might, if spoken at the wrong time or by the wrong person, bring suspicion instead. A healer who helped 5 children and failed the 6th might be thanked 5 times, and that one curse was enough. This was the double edge of folk belief. It gave people tools to understand their world, but also the framework to fear those same tools. If something went wrong, Much of this came from pre-Christian traditions, woven into daily life long before the church arrived in these lands. Old feast days, forest rituals, moon planting cycles, stories of fairies, spirits, and the second sight. These customs didn't disappear with Christianity. They lived alongside it. In Scotland, for example, it wasn't uncommon for villagers to leave offerings at the foot of certain trees. In Germany, people still whispered of mountain spirits and trolls. In England, mothers tied red ribbons around their babies' wrists. Even priests, because they, too, grew up with them. But over time, especially in the years after the Reformation, tolerance, the 17th century was a time of deep religious tension. Catholics and Protestants saw each other not just as wrong, but as dangerous. Every plague, every failed harvest, every earthquake was seen as a sign that God was displeased. And when people began searching for why, they didn't always look upward. They looked around. In such a world, the woman who mumbled to herself, the midwife whose patients died, the quiet person who lived alone in the woods, the child who claimed to dream of shadowy figures, these were the places where fear took root. Because in a culture where people believed God was watching, they also believed the devil was whispering, and sometimes that whisper could sound like a neighbor's voice. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine not a flicker of candlelight in a dim room, a worn Bible opened with reverent care, a priest adjusting his cassock, preparing a sermon on vigilance, and a woman perhaps older, perhaps poor, sitting at the edge of a cot, her hands wrapped around a child burning with fever. This is the true beginning of the witch panic, not in fire, but in fear. Fear shaped by belief, and belief shaped by centuries of religious stories, folklore, and whispered warnings passed down in the folds of ordinary days. To understand the witch hunts, we must understand the pact, not the legal accusations, but the imagined contract, deeply believed, deeply feared, that stood at the center of it all. The idea was this: she had chosen, willingly or in desperation, to enter into a bargain with the devil. He came to her sometimes in dreams, sometimes in the forest, sometimes disguised as an animal or a man, and he offered something: power, protection, healing, wealth, sometimes only food. And in return, sometimes it was loyalty, sometimes it was her name written in a book, sometimes most chilling to those who believed she nor you. It was described in sermons, in books, in official church in the minds of many, perhaps more so. And yet, the details were often strange, even contradictory. Some believed the devil left a mark on those who served him, a blemish or mole that felt no pain when pricked. Others said the devil appeared to his followers in the form of a familiar animal companion who brought news or helped cast spells. Black cats, toads, crows, rats, these were not simply pests. And if a woman lived alone and was seen to feed such a creature, that was enough to plant a seed of suspicion. The devil's pact also carried with it tales of secret ceremonies called. There, it was said, they danced, chanted, and turned bread to ash, milk to blood, good fortune to ruin. Of course, No one in the village ever actually saw such a meeting. But that didn't matter. In the world of the 17th century, not seeing was part of the danger. It meant the devil was good at hiding. Imagination filled the gaps. And imagination, some accounts told of witches flying through the night on sticks, not fantasy. Other reports claimed witches could change shape, slipping into the bodies of cats, foxes, hares, or that they could steal milk from cows simply by tying knots in a rope, or spoil crops by whispering a rhyme into the wind. These details, strange as they seem now, were not questioned then, because they weren't meant to be logical. They were meant to be plausible within belief. And belief, at this time, was a lens stronger than any fact. Even the body became evident. If a woman's body bore a blemish, if she had a birthmark, it was seen not as biology, but as branding. If she had none, and the words she used if she muttered in pain, or recited a charm once learned from a grandmother, those, too, became suspicious. Because, in this world, knowledge that did not come from a priest or a physician could not be trusted, especially if it came from a woman. The Witches' Pact was not only about magic, it was about control. Control over health, over fate, over men, and that, more than anything, made the idea terrifying to those in power. But here is the quiet truth. Most of those accused had no such power. They were healers, herbalists, lonely souls who simply didn't fit. But once named, their fate was sealed, because to the village, to the court, to the frightened mother of a dead child, or the farmer whose cow would not milk, the idea of the pact was not fiction. It was reassurance. If someone was to blame, then the rest could be safe. And in that cruel math, belief triumphed over truth. The pact, in the end, was rarely written, but it was deeply, tragically believed. Imagine now not the quiet cottage, but the tall, dim corridors of an early, modern library, leather-bound, dust motes dancing in shafts of light, filtered through narrow windows. Here, among the quiet rustle of robes and quills, a very different kind of witch hunt was unfolding. Because while most accused witches were poor, illiterate, and utterly ordinary, their fate was often decided by men who spent their lives surrounded by books, scholars, clergy, judges, men who, in their own way, and those beliefs were carefully recorded. There was, in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, a genre of literature that today seems peculiar, even surreal. They were called demonologies, booksome, hundreds of pages, long dedicated entirely to the study of devils, witches, and their supposed activities, written not as fiction, but as manuals. Manuals for identifying. The most infamous of these books was the Malleus, written in 1486 by two inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Springer. It became the cornerstone of European witch-hunting doctrine. Its pages, filled with Latin prose and bold pronouncements, laid out arguments not only for the existence of witches, but for the necessity of their extermination. It claimed, quite confidently, that women were more susceptible to the devil's temptations, that their bodies were softer, their desires more dangerous, their loyalty more icily corrupted. It offered procedures how to interrogate, and though it was condemned by some even in its time, it was widely read, widely distributed, and widely believed. The Malleus was just the beginning. Across Europe, a French legal scholars call for aggressive trials and torture. King James VI, which argued passionately for belief in witchcraft, and described it as a crime against both God and monarch. Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft, which dared to question the hunts and deny the existence of magic only to have his work banned and burned. These books were not dusty curiosities. They shaped policy, informed clergy, were quoted in courtrooms, and what's more, many were written in Latin, or complex legal phrasing, which meant that those most affected by them could not read them. A poor woman might never know that her trial was being shaped by ideas scribbled years earlier in a university far away. Ideas that turned suspicion into procedure. The demonologies were obsessed with detail. They catalogued symptoms, how witches cast spells, how demons seduced them, how the devil appeared sometimes as a man. The effect of these texts, they made fear into scholarship, and once something is written in ink, especially by a respected man in robes, it becomes harder to question. And so, villagers took these ideas to heart. Constables quoted guidelines. Elders repeated phrases like the devilish mark or diabolical compact with quiet authority. And when a woman stood in front of them, tired and poor, with a rough hand and a faded shawl, her story was measured not against her character, but against these books. She became, without knowing, a case study. This mingling of scholarship and fear also explains how certain myths endured. The witch's Sabbath, the flying broomstick, these were not just folk tales, they were annotated, not just among the frightened. This is the quieter tragedy of the witch hunt, that it was not only ignorance that doomed so many, but also knowledge that lacked compassion, knowledge that saw patterns where there were none, knowledge that gave those in power the language to turn grief into guilt and guilt into punishment. These books no longer guide us, examined by historians, referenced with caution, but their influence remains in how we think about fear, about how ideas become rules, and how those rules shape lives. Imagine it is night again. The fire in the hearth has burned low. A single log crackles softly outside. The wind hums a long, low note through the gaps in the shuttered window. And above it, I'll be on the roof, but the stillness begins to move. A shadow crosses the wall, just a trick of the firelight. A sound creaks in the rafters. You tell yourself it is nothing. This is not madness. It is the ordinary experience of the human mind. When sleep has not come, when the body is tired, when the night is long. Now imagine that same moment, but in the 17th century, when every dream might be a warning, every sound might be a sign, every sensation, no matter how fleeting. The line between waking and dreaming was far thinner then. People believed in visions, in messages from beyond, in visitations. A child might wake from a fever and describe a black figure at the foot of her bed. Or you, a farmer, might see shapes in the smoke rising from his fire, and in a world that believed those signs were real, They became real, not lies, not inventions, but truths experienced by the heart and carried by the voice. Many accusations of witchcraft began not with action, but with dreams. A young girl might say she saw the accused dancing with devils in the woods, that she flew through the air on a stick, that she felt a hand press upon her chest at night. But in the 17th century, the sensation of being lifted from bed, unable to speak, unable to move, of being carried against one's will through the air to join a Sabbath of darkness. But if it came at the right time, when fear was already high, when crops had failed, when the vicar's child had taken sick, it could be enough, especially if more than one person dreamt the same. There are records, hundreds of trials, where the primary evidence was testimony of the mind. A servant said she dreamt her mistress whispered to a toad. A farmer said he saw the accused walking through a field, but when he followed, she had vanished. A child said a woman fed her a red apple, and after she ate it, her hands ached for days. These are not crimes, not even events, but in the logic of the time, they were echoes of the invisible, proof of a world beyond the veil. Even the accused sometimes confessed to dreams. Some said they had visions of the devil, of being marked, touched, spoken to in strange tongues. Some described being led to a gathering of shadows, but these were not always coerced. Many believed what they said, because when fear surrounds you, seeps into every corner of your world, your mind begins to fill the gaps. It does what minds do best, and in the long dark of an isolated night, those explanations can feel more solid than the floor beneath your feet. It is humanity, even when we sleep, but in a world where stories were taken as evidence, a nightmare might cost you your life. There were even those who believed that the devil could place false dreams in the minds of the innocent, that the visions of children might be used as weapons, that hallucinations were not mental illness. And so even the act of seeing something became suspect. Did you see it? Or did the devil want you to? This logic created a terrifying loop. If the accused denied all wrongdoing, it was said the devil protected them. If they confessed, it was proof. If they wept, it was guilt. If they did not, it was pride. And if they dreamed, or caused dreams in others, then the veil had been pierced. The space between reality and belief had collapsed, and someone would have to answer for it. Even today, we know how fragile perception can be, how grief can bring visions, how stress distorts memory, how the mind defends itself by inventing connections. But in the 17th century, and the law, shaped by fear, listened to the whispers of the mind. That is how the fire spread, but with imagination. Her name is Marjorie, a simple name, ordinary, like the others in the village. Her hair is tucked beneath a bonnet. Her sleeves are rolled, not out of pride. Her hands are not soft. They are busy hands, ones that need bread. She is not loud. She is, like so many others in her time, just trying to survive. She lives at the edge of the village, in a house that smells of yeast and wool and wood smoke. There is a patch of herbs behind the dormant. She tends it when she has the time and little peace. Because Marjorie is a mother, and her child has died. It happened quickly. A fever. He had been chasing geese just days before, laughing as he slipped in the mud. Now he is buried beneath a stone too small to need carving. Marjorie's grief is not theatrical. It is not the kind that keens or collapses. It is the quieter kind. The kind that dries out the throat, that keeps her awake at night, staring at the wooden beams above her bed. In the days that follow, people bring bread, a few kind words. Then they retreat, because no one knows what to say. No one wants to say the wrong thing. Marjorie does not sleep, not fully, at night. She remembers things. A time the boy tripped and bled. A time he cried for food, and she had only broth. A time he said he felt cold, and she told him not to fuss. And most of all, she remembers a week before he fell ill. An old woman spoke to her at the market. Alice? She had touched the boy's head, not cruelly, not forcefully, just a gesture, a soft word. Watch him, dear. And Marjorie had smiled and thanked her, because the boy grew pale, and then he was gone. In the quiet of her grief, the memory grows. It sharpens, it rewrites itself. Was Alice warning her, or was she predicting? And if predicting, then the thought takes hold. Not yet. But she shares the memory with a neighbor. Just a whisper, just a wondering, and the neighbor listens, because she, too, has had misfortunes lately, because Alice once gave her a strange look when her goat went missing. Marjorie's grief is not a weapon, but it becomes one, not because she means harm, but because in a world where medicine is rare and answers are few, and when the ground shifts under your feet, you give it one. You give it a face, a voice, a past. And the village listens. They remember the boy's illness. They remember Alice's strange ways. They remember the other small things: milk spoiling, animals sickening, bread failing to rise. Together, they become a pattern. Marjorie does not scream. She does not rage. She sits in church with her hands folded. She says her prayers. She presses a hand to the small stone over her child's grave. But when asked formally, gently, if she ever noticed anything unusual, she says, yes. A single word, soft but enough, because grief, when joined with memory, and in this world, testimony is belief made real. The faces behind the finger: his name is Thomas Wayne. He is not a wicked man. He is the sort of man the village depends on in ordinary ways. He repairs, fences, splits firewood, hauls sacks to and from the mill. He was born in the village. He does not question the way things are. But Thomas carries something inside him, something he does not show, something that began years ago. You see, once, Thomas had a field dispute. It was minor, at first, just a matter of a low stone wall separating his land from his neighbor's, a row of hedges, perhaps a few feet too far east. The neighbor was Alice's husband. The man had died since, but Thomas had not forgotten. And when Alice kept the land, when she trimmed the hedges herself and planted herbs along the edge, Thomas had said nothing aloud, but he watched. And over time, the boundary, the one made of stone and soil, became a boundary of something else, of suspicion. It's the little things that stayed with him. How she never greeted him when he passed. How she let vines grow over the wall. How her cat once sat on the corner post, unmoving, as if keeping watch. And when his crops failed one season, not entirely, just less than he expected, he found himself, against his better judgment, looking toward her garden. It thrived, her apples still firm, he told himself. It was just, but chance is a brittle excuse. One day, one morning, she simply wouldn't rise. By dusk, she was still, eyes glazed, toward the narrow house, the thatched roof, the neat little path through the wildflowers. He had seen Alice kneeling in her garden, and she had looked up. He remembered that look, because it felt like something deliberate, not accusatory. She looked at me strange, he said, and someone else, half drunk and half bitter, said they'd had odd luck. And in that quiet exchange, something unspoken became shared. Because resentment is rarely loud, it's a slow trickle, a worn path. Alice, who once claimed nothing but peace, now seemed too quiet, too private, too precise. Her ebbs? Why so many? Her books? Why so secret? Her smiles? Why so rare? Thomas did not hate her, but he did not trust her. And in times of unease, when the child died, Thomas remembered the A-way. And when asked formally, he said yes. He did not invent stories. He did not lie, he simply recalled, in a tone half forgotten. And when the elders nodded gravely, not satisfaction, the wall between them had always been there. Now, at last, others could see it too. Her name is Liddy. She is 8 years old. She wears a rough-spun dress. Her hair is the color of straw in sunlight. She hums when she walks. Not songs just, the kind of tuneless melodies children carry in their breath. Liddy has a doll. Its face is made from cloth. Its eyes are just stitches. She calls it Hobble, for reasons she cannot explain. She lives with her mother and older brother in a small cottage near the stream. A cold that turned to coughing, then stillness. She remembers the sound of his breath on the last night. She remembers her mother's hands. But what Liddy remembers most is what came after. A week later, she had a dream. She dreamt of a woman not her mother. A woman with long fingers, holding a candle that did not flicker. The woman said nothing. She simply placed a candle on the ground and pointed toward Liddy's house. When Liddy woke, she was not afraid. Her mother paled. She told her again the next day, this time adding a new detail, that the woman wore a grey shawl and her shoes. But in that small village, dreams had begun to mean more, especially now, with whispers about Alice moving through the streets, like smoke. Liddy's mother told the priest. The priest asked to speak with Liddy. She came in quietly, holding Hobble in her arms. She did not understand what the questions meant, only that they wanted to know more. So she tried. She said the woman came at night. That she whispered that her cat had eyes like coins. The priest wrote it down. He asked if the woman had touched her, then shook her head, then said she wasn't sure, that maybe it was just in the dream. The priest nodded gently. Liddy asked if she had done something wrong, but her words had already begun to change everything, because in this world, the dreams of children were not dismissed. They were believed. Children were seen as innocent, and if they said they had seen a witch, no malice was assumed, only faith in the purity of the child's soul. Children do not understand consequence. They do not see the gap between story and testimony, between imagination and accusation. And once the words are spoken, they cannot be gathered again. Soon others began to ask Liddy, "Did the woman fly? Did she dance?" Liddy answered the best she could. Sometimes she didn't remember. Her dreams became evidence. Her whispers became scripture. And though she never saw Alice in the waking world again, her voice echoed through the chapel. The market, the quiet gatherings behind closed shutters. She did not mean harm. She did not understand what harm was. She only knew that people were listening, that her words made adults look at her with wide eyes and soft voices. And so her stories grew. Liddy is not to blame. She is not a liar. She is a mirror, one held up to the fear of those around her. And what she reflected was what they already believed. His name is Father Will. He is neither young nor old, somewhere in the long stretch of middle age. He walks with a measured step, not slow, not rushed. His sermons are quiet. His vestments are plain. He keeps a tidy room behind the chapel, one window, one chair, a table where his books are lined in careful order. His Latin is impeccable. The villagers trust him. He came to them 10 years ago, after the last priest died of the fever. No miracles, no controversy. He simply appeared one spring morning with a cart, a trunk, and a face already marked by long hours of contemplation. In the years that followed, he listened, he guided, he corrected. When needed, always gently. He never raised his voice. And so, when whispers began about Alice, they came to him. First, the grieving mother, Marjorie. Then the neighbour, Thomas. Then others, in small waves of discomfort and memory. Father Willin listened. He nodded, asked a few questions, and prayed with them. When the elders approached him for guidance, he did not call for fire. He did not shout about devils or scream for holy war. Instead, he withdrew to his room and took down his oldest volume. A weathered book, half theology, half observation, its edges frayed. He turned to the section on discernment, of vigilance, of the dangers of both belief and disbelief. It advised prayer. It suggested testing the spirit. It did not say what to do. So Father Willem prayed. He prayed for wisdom, for restraint, for clarity, and when he rose from his knees, he made his decision, not to denounce, not to defend, but to allow, to let the process unfold, as it had in other towns, to let the village inquire, to let the elders investigate, to let the records be written. He told himself this was neutrality, but in doing nothing, he did everything, because in a time and place such as this, the priest's silence is not silence at all. It is permission. When he said, "Let the elders decide," they heard, "You are justified." When he said, "God will reveal the truth," and when the child spoke her dream, and the neighbor recalled his sheep, and the mother whispered of the hand on her son's brow, he wrote it all down, neatly, without judgment, without protest. He was, in his own way, a careful man, but not a brave one. He did not visit Alice. He did not ask her to speak her own testimony. He did not wonder aloud. Instead, he prayed. And when the inquiry ended and the exile was ordered, he watched from the steps of the chapel. He held his Bible to his chest, that he had followed the procedure, that if God willed mercy, but deep within, beneath the robes, beneath the quiet breath of prayer, something ached. He had not lied, but he had allowed. And in that allowance, Alice's fate was sealed. He did not speak her name again. Not in public, not in sermon, but sometimes when he sits alone in the chapel after dusk, he remembers her face, the way she looked, not defiant, not afraid, but distant, as though she had already left the village long before the cart came for her. He wonders, though he never says it aloud, but that word never came, and so the hunt continued. It sits on the hill, 3 stories high, slate roof, shuttered windows. Its gardens are neatly trimmed, its gates cast in wrought iron. The villagers see it each day, whether they look directly or not. It looms not with menace, but with a kind of silent weight, constant, like the bell tower or the sun rising behind the trees. It is there, and has always been. Inside, Lady Eleanor Greaves walks her corridors in satin slippers. Her gown rustles as she passes from room to room. Candles are always lit before she enters. The hearth is warm, even in summer. The curtains are thick enough to block out the noise of birdsong. She does not know the names of all the villagers, nor do they expect her to. She receives visitors, clergymen. They bring letters, gossip, and occasionally exotic teas in pale ceramic jars. Lady Eleanor is not wicked. She writes small poems about the garden. She sings when she thinks no one hears her. She is also a woman of great learning. She owns books, dozens. Some of them are in Latin, a few in French. One tucked in the back of a rosewood cabinet is said to be Arabic. She keeps her reading private, though sometimes she makes notes in a careful hand. She is known to host gatherings in her drawing room. Not dances, not revelries, but conversations about stars, about healing herbs, about dreams. The women who attend these conversations are never accused of witchcraft. Even when they discuss moon phases, even when they burn dried lavender while reciting verses about the body and the spirit, even when a visitor whispers that Lady Eleanor keeps a black cat named Aurelius. Why? Because the manor sits on the hill, because Lady Eleanor has name, position, and protection. When someone of her class uses herbs, it is called botanical study. When she speaks of dreams, when she avoids church for weeks at a time, it is private reflection. She wears no warts. Her skin is powdered. Her words are gentle. And so the villagers say nothing, though they do not say so aloud. The constable once joked that if Eleanor Greaves turned a man into a frog, he would still thank her for the lesson. Power creates distance, and in that distance, fire cannot reach. It is not only Eleanor. Across the countryside, dozens of women learned, tittled, explored the same subjects that condemned peasants to exile, torture, or worse. They brewed teas for sleep. They consulted star charts. They hosted and corresponded with thinkers in distant lands. But they did so behind embroidered curtains and polished doors. Their knowledge, their eccentricities, were sheltered by the language of refinement. They were not witches. They were curious. Even when rumors swirled, they were handled differently. A maid dismissed quietly, a name spoken less often in town, but never a trial. Because in the eyes of the Lond of the church, the sins of the wealthy were more easily forgiven, or explained, or ignored. Where suspicion touched the poor like fire, it touched the rich like smoke brief, without harm, soon forgotten. Back in the village, Alice once grew. The same herbs Eleanor did, her shawl thin. So when illness came, Eleanor's, by contrast, looked like art. This is not a story of cruelty. Lady Eleanor never accused Alice, but the system that protected Eleanor was the same one that endangered Alice. It was not just belief that burned witches, it was powerlessness. The clergyman's niece, protected by proximity, her name is Joan Alder. She is 17. She lives not in a grand manor like Lady Eleanor, but in a modest house beside the rectory, a small, tidy home with ivy growing up one side and a cluster of lilacs. He is well respected, well read. His sermons are thoughtful, his advice sought. He is neither harsh nor indulgent. He has lived in the village for more than 20 years. Joan came to live with him after her parents died both of the ague in the same winter. She arrived with a single trunk and an embroidered handkerchief, the initials J.A. sewn in white thread. Joan is quiet, but not shy. She walks with a grace that turns heads. She reads poetry. She draws leaves and birds in a notebook she keeps beneath her pillow. She is not a witch. No one says she is, but she does things that others less connected might be questioned for. She walks barefoot in the garden at night. She speaks to her cat. She gathers herbs from the woods and ties them in bundles, not for sale, but for her own curiosity. Once she was seen picking dead man's fingers, a pale finger like fungus that grows in damp earth. The old woman who saw her gasped and crossed herself, but she said nothing. She lives beside the church. She kneels every Sunday in the front pew. She attends prayer circles and donates linens to the Widow's Fund. She is, above all, safe. When a child fell ill that spring, and someone murmured about bad luck, it was not Joan's name, they whispered. When the farmer's sow birthed a stillborn litter, no one mentioned the drawings Joan had made of lunar cycles in her notebook. They looked past her oddities. They called them fancies. They said she had a gentle heart, because her uncle, standing in the pulpit, his silence was a kind of shield. In truth, the rector knew of Joan's habits. He found the drawings once more ink, sketches of eyes, moons, and plants. He saw her once, out near the standing stones, holding her palms to the rising sun. He did not scold her. He only said, "There are some things it is better not to be seen doing." She had nodded, but she had learned to be quiet. Joan's safety was not because she was cautious. No one dared to. To accuse the rector's home was to question the church, and that was something no one in the village was ready to do. Elsewhere in the country, they spoke of dreams, and they were accused. Some were burned, but Joan remained, because in a world where fear could burn a woman alive, the right address could keep a girl warm. And so she lived on, still walking barefoot, still drawing, but never touched. The merchant's wife, and she lives above a shop that sells silks. Her husband, Samuel Darren, not the richest in the county, but rich enough to wear gloves, even when it's warm, rich enough to leave for London in the spring, rich enough that when their shutters close, she is not cruel, not warm, just ... cool. Cool in the way that expensive porcelain is cool when touched. Beautiful, admired. She hosts small gatherings, but dinners with polished spoons and foreign wines that make the tongue feel bright and heavy. Some of the village women say she reads too much. Others say her gaze makes them uncomfortable. Still others say she knows things before they happen. None of them say these things too loudly, because Agnes has protection. But not of the kind Joan had. Joan had blood, family, proximity to God. Agnes has money, and money bends rules. Once, a servant in the house fell ill. She said strange things in her fever, that she heard voices in the garden late at night, that there were symbols drawn beneath the rug in the guest room. The rector was informed. The constable was summoned, but they did not question Agnes. Instead, they questioned the servant. She was young, not from the village. When asked again about the symbols, that it had been dark. When asked about the voices, she said it was probably just wind or a dream. No inquiry. The servant was dismissed quietly, with a few coins and a bundle of bread. Agnes never addressed the matter again, but for a time afterward, people noticed that she wore a new necklace, a silver charm in the shape of a key, its origin unknown. The whispers never stopped entirely. Some said she had a way about her, that her hair never seemed too grey, that birds followed her when she walked. But she was never touched, because her husband paid the tithe early, because the mayor once owed her brother a debt, because she hosted the midwinter feast and provided oranges when no one else could. Her status was not just social, it was structural. It insulated her, not because anyone believed she was good, but because the system around her had no mechanism for guilt. To accuse money was to risk business, and to risk business was to threaten the village's delicate balance. Her shutters stayed closed in the mornings. Her cat wandered freely through the market. Her books remained untouched by curious hands. Agnes may have practiced charms. She may have read forbidden texts, because in this world, vulnerability was, and Agnes was never vulnerable. Why some were never touched? Step back for a moment, not far, just enough to look down upon the whole of the village, the manor, the chapel, the woods, beyond. Now, soften the edges. Let the people blur a little, as if they were figures on a faded tapestry. A woman with lace at her throat, if you did not know their names, if you only saw what they did, who sang charms to a child. Could you say who would be accused? Because the difference was not always what they did, it was who they were. The old woman who sold salves in the village square did the same thing Lady Eleanor did in her library. The girl with the charm bracelet sang the same words that the rector's niece whispered in her garden, but only one would be called witch, the other would be called eccentric or There were women who cast runes from polished stones on embroidered cloth, and they were called healers because their husbands were magistrates. There were others who tucked lavender under a sick child's pillow. It was the frame around it. What weight did your name carry? What debts were owed to your father? What stories were told about your grandmother? More than truth, more than justice. Some women burned for herbs. Others kept whole gardens and received praise. Some were cast out for a whispered dream. Others told whole stories and were applauded for their imagination. Some wept behind locked doors. Others opened their windows and let the moonlight in. It is easy, now, to wonder how such injustice was accepted. But it did not come all at once. It crept quietly. And those who were spared had every reason not to speak, because speaking meant drawing attention. And attention could, in the wrong light, look very much like guilt. And so, the privileged few remained silent. They watched from their balconies. They closed their shutters. Their hands stayed clean. Nor you, but because no one asked them to wash. This is the quiet contrast of the witch hunts. That fear fell hardest on those with no one to catch them. That belief, when mixed with power, bent to convenience, that some lived long enough to grow old in their eccentricity, while others vanished with barely a name left behind. And now, centuries later, as we look back at these stories softly, from the warmth of the present, we begin to understand the line between witch and woman was never drawn in magic. It was drawn in class, in power, and in who was believed. And that is the part that still echoes. The wind has died down now. The shutters are closed. The candle burns low. You have walked through cottages and manors, wandered the edges of dreams. You've sat beside the fire with those who feared, and stood quietly behind those who pointed. You have listened. And that, more than anything else, matters, because the history of the witch hunts is not a story of monsters. It is a story of people, ordinary, complex, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, often afraid. People who lived in a world where illness was mystery, where dreams blurred with warnings, where knowledge could be a gift or a curse, depending on who held it. People who whispered, who cried out in grief, who did not always mean harm. And people who paid the price, those who were named, who were pushed into silence or exile, or worse because someone else, somewhere, spoke their name with the wrong tone, at the wrong time. They were not all innocent, but neither were they all guilty. Most were simply unlucky. Unlucky to be old, or young, or outspoken, or alone. Unlucky to know herbs, or to be remembered for something other than kindness. History remembers the flames. It remembers the trials, but we must also remember the quiet moments that led there. The gaze that lingered too long, the dream retold once too often, the silence that was mistaken for guilt. And in remembering gently, we learn not only about the past, but about how belief shapes law, how fear bends truth, how those without power are asked to explain themselves, while others are asked nothing at all. Tonight, you do not need to judge. You do not need to draw conclusions. You do not need to feel anger or sorrow or even understanding. You have simply listened. And now, as the fire fades to embers and the air grows still, You may let these voices settle. Let them drift out, slowly, into the quiet corners of your mind. Let their memories become soft. You are safe now, in your room, in a time where candles are no longer feared, and somewhere, far away in history's shadow, the wind stirs the trees again, the cat stretches near the hearth, but full of those who were once forgotten. Good night.